June 7, 1981. The afternoon sun beats down mercilessly on the Negev desert. 8 pilots sit strapped inside their cockpits, engines screaming at full afterburner, each aircraft groaning under the weight of 2,000-pound bombs. The runway stretches before them like a ribbon of possibility and doom. 700 miles away, in the heart of Iraq, a nuclear reactor hums with the promise of atomic weapons. In less than 90 minutes, these young men will either change history or die trying. The aircraft they fly is brand new, untested in real combat, a machine born from American engineering brilliance and Israeli tactical desperation. This is the General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon, the aircraft that would become the most successful fighter jet ever built. But the story of how this American marvel became the deadliest weapon in Israeli hands is a tale of secrets, technology transfers, political intrigue, and the quiet genius of engineers who transformed a good airplane into something extraordinary. The F-16 was never supposed to be a world beater. When the United States Air Force announced the lightweight fighter program in 1971, they wanted something simple, something cheap, something expendable. The Pentagon brass envisioned a small, nimble dogfighter that could be produced in massive numbers to supplement the expensive F-15 Eagle. What emerged from the drawing boards at General Dynamics was anything but ordinary. The YF-16 prototype first flew in January 1974, and test pilots immediately knew they had something special. The aircraft was inherently unstable, a deliberate design choice that made it incredibly agile but impossible to fly without computer assistance. The fly-by-wire system, a revolutionary concept at the time, translated the pilot's inputs into precise control surface movements hundreds of times per second. No human could fly this aircraft alone. The computer was the co-pilot, the unseen partner that kept the machine from tumbling out of control. If you find this story compelling, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. Dozens of fascinating military history documentaries await you, each one diving deep into the events that shaped our world. The cockpit of the F-16 was unlike anything pilots had ever seen. Instead of sitting upright, like in every previous fighter, the pilot reclined at 30 degrees, his seat tilted back to help him withstand the crushing force of 9G maneuvers. The traditional center-mounted control stick was gone, replaced by a side-stick controller positioned under the pilot's right arm. The frameless bubble canopy provided 360 degrees of visibility, eliminating the blind spots that had gotten so many pilots eliminated in previous conflicts. Every design decision was made with one goal in mind: to give the pilot the best possible chance of winning a dogfight and coming home alive. Israel watched the F-16's development with intense interest. The Israeli Air Force had always understood that quality trumped quantity in aerial warfare. Surrounded by enemies with massive air forces, Israel could not afford to lose pilots or aircraft. Every sortie had to count. Every engagement had to end in victory. The 1973 Yom Kippur War had been a brutal wake-up call. The Israeli Air Force lost nearly one-third of its frontline combat aircraft in just 18 days of fighting. Surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft guns had turned the skies over the Suez Canal and the Golan Heights into killing fields. Israel needed new aircraft, and they needed them desperately. In August 1978, Israel placed an order for 75 F-16s under a program codenamed Peace Marble. The first aircraft arrived in Israel in 1980, and the Israelis immediately christened them with a Hebrew name, Netz, meaning hawk. But the Israelis were not content to simply operate the American jets as delivered. From the very first day, Israeli engineers began examining every component, every system, every wire, and circuit board. They wanted to understand exactly how the aircraft worked, and more importantly, how they could make it better. The relationship between American and Israeli defense engineers was complicated from the start. The Americans were simultaneously generous and protective, sharing advanced technology while trying to maintain control over how it was used. Israel, for its part, was simultaneously grateful and determined to achieve technological independence. The Israelis had learned hard lessons about relying on foreign suppliers. In 1967, France had imposed an arms embargo on Israel just before the Six-Day War, forcing the Israelis to steal their own Mirage fighter jets from a French port. That experience left deep scars on the Israeli psyche and drove a national obsession with self-sufficiency in defense matters. The first real test of the F-16'S came sooner than anyone expected. Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein had purchased a French nuclear reactor called Osirak, ostensibly for civilian power generation. Israeli intelligence believed otherwise. They were convinced that Iraq intended to produce weapons-grade plutonium and build atomic bombs. The consequences of a nuclear-armed Iraq were unthinkable. Israel decided to act. Operation Opera, also known as Operation Babylon, was one of the most audacious military strikes in history. The target was 700 miles from Israeli territory, deep inside a hostile nation, protected by sophisticated air defenses. The F-16'S was chosen for the mission because of its exceptional range and its ability to deliver heavy ordnance with precision. Each aircraft would carry 2 Mark 84 bombs, massive 2,000-pound weapons that could penetrate the reactor's thick concrete dome. Training began in secret in the summer of 1980. Israeli pilots flew practice runs against a full-scale replica of the reactor built in the Negev desert. They perfected their approach profiles, their bombing techniques, their emergency procedures. Every detail was rehearsed until it became automatic. The pilots knew that they would have only one chance to succeed. A second strike was impossible. The element of surprise was everything. On the afternoon of June 7, 1981, the strike package took off from Etzion Air Base in the Sinai Peninsula. 8 F-16'S aircraft, each piloted by some of the finest aviators in the Israeli Air Force, climbed into the desert sky. 6 F-15 Eagles flew escort, ready to engage any enemy fighters that might intercept the formation. The flight path took them over Jordan and Saudi Arabia, hugging the desert floor to avoid radar detection. Radio silence was absolute. The pilots navigated by dead reckoning, checking their positions against landmarks that they had memorized from satellite photographs. At approximately 5:30 in the afternoon, the formation reached Iraqi airspace. The F-15 escorts climbed to high altitude to establish a protective umbrella, while the F-16 pilots pushed their throttles forward and pulled back on their sticks. With their external fuel tanks jettisoned and their bomb loads reduced by the weight of fuel burned during the long flight, the Nets aircraft climbed rapidly to acquire their target. The Osirak reactor dome, 60 feet in diameter and 11 feet thick, was unmistakable. One by one, the pilots dove on their target, releasing their bombs with precision that stunned even the most optimistic planners. In less than 2 minutes, it was over. The reactor was destroyed, reduced to burning rubble. Every Israeli aircraft returned home safely. The Osirak raid announced the F-16'S to the world. Here was proof that a small nation with advanced technology could project power far beyond its borders. But the real story was only beginning. Israeli engineers had already begun the process of transforming the F-16 from an American aircraft into something uniquely Israeli. The modifications started small, but quickly grew in scope and ambition. Israeli avionics engineers developed new electronic warfare systems, jamming pods that could blind enemy radars and defeat surface-to-air missiles. They designed new weapons interfaces that allowed the F-16 to carry Israeli-made bombs and missiles. They rewrote flight software to optimize the aircraft's performance for the specific threats and terrain that Israeli pilots faced. Each modification was made with a single purpose: to give Israeli pilots an edge that their enemies could not match. 1 year after the Osirak raid, the F-16'S faced its greatest test. In June 1982, Israel launched Operation Peace for Galilee, a military offensive into Lebanon designed to destroy Palestinian Liberation Organization bases and push Syrian forces away from the Israeli border. The Syrian Air Force, equipped with Soviet MiG-21s and MiG-23s, rose to meet the Israeli onslaught. What followed was one of the largest aerial battles since the Second World War. The fighting began on June 9, 1982, in the skies over the Bekaa Valley, Operation Mole Cricket. 19, as the Israelis called it, was a masterpiece of planning and execution. Israeli Air Force F-16's engaged waves of Syrian fighters in a furious air-to-air melee that lasted 3 days. The Syrian pilots were brave, but outmatched. Their Soviet-built aircraft were no match for the combination of Israeli skill and American technology. When the smoke cleared, Israeli F-16s had claimed 44 air-to-air victories without suffering a single loss. The kill ratio was infinite. The Bekaa Valley Massacre, as some military historians have called it, fundamentally changed the way the world viewed aerial combat. The lessons learned in those 3 days of fighting would echo through the halls of air forces around the globe. Electronic warfare had proven decisive. Israeli jamming aircraft had blinded Syrian radars and rendered their surface-to-air missiles useless. Beyond visual range tactics had given way to close-in dogfighting, and the F-16's agility had proven its worth in the swirling chaos of multi-aircraft engagements. The pilot, not the machine, remained the decisive factor in aerial warfare. Behind the glory of victory lay thousands of hours of engineering work. Israeli technicians at the Air Force's maintenance facilities had developed new procedures for keeping the F-16s ready for combat. They had created modifications that improved the aircraft's reliability in the harsh desert environment. They had trained pilots in tactics that exploited every advantage that the F-16 offered. This institutional knowledge, passed down from generation to generation of pilots and engineers, became Israel's secret weapon. The success of the F-16 in Israeli service presented a dilemma for both nations. Israel wanted more aircraft and more capability. The United States wanted to maintain its technological edge and control over how American weapons were used. The solution that emerged was unprecedented in the history of military cooperation. Israel would be allowed to modify American aircraft with Israeli systems, creating hybrid machines that combined the best of both nations' technologies. Please remember to like this documentary if you find it informative. Your engagement helps us continue producing high-quality historical content that honors the sacrifices of those who served. The first major Israeli variant of the F-16 was designated Barak, Hebrew for lightning. The F-16C and D models that formed the basis of the Barak fleet arrived in Israel beginning in 1987. These aircraft were more capable than the original Nets models, with improved radar, better engines, and the ability to carry a wider variety of weapons. But the Israelis were not satisfied with merely operating American aircraft. They wanted to create something new. Israeli engineers replaced the American radar warning receivers with locally developed systems that were tailored to the specific threats that Israeli pilots faced. They integrated Israeli electronic warfare pods that could jam enemy radars more effectively than any American system. They modified the weapons software to allow the F-16 to carry Israeli-made missiles like the Python, a heat-seeking weapon that many experts considered superior to the American Sidewinder. Each modification represented years of research and development, billions of shekels invested in making the F-16 the deadliest fighter jet in the Middle East. The story of Israeli modifications to the F-16 cannot be told without mentioning the Lavi. In 1980, Israel announced plans to develop an indigenous fighter jet, a project that would eventually consume over $2 billion of American aid and represent the largest weapons program in Israeli history. The Lavi was supposed to be everything that Israel wanted, a modern, multi-role fighter designed specifically for Israeli requirements, built by Israeli workers, maintained by Israeli technicians, and free from American political control. The Lavi program began as a modest effort to replace aging A-4 Skyhawks and K-4 fighters in the Israeli Air Force's inventory, but ambitions quickly grew. By 1982, the Lavi had been redesigned as a high-performance fighter bomber capable of air superiority missions. On paper, the Lavi looked remarkably similar to the F-16, a single-engine delta-wing aircraft with canard control surfaces and an advanced fly-by-wire system. Critics accused Israel of copying American technology. Supporters argued that the Lavi represented the natural evolution of fighter design. The technology transfer from the United States to Israel for the Lavi program was staggering. American companies provided engines, composite materials, electronic countermeasures, radar systems, and flight control computers. Over 700 American firms served as subcontractors or vendors on the program. Israeli engineers gained hands-on experience with the most advanced aerospace technologies in the world. They learned how to design fly-by-wire systems, how to manufacture composite airframe structures, how to develop and integrate advanced avionics. This knowledge would prove invaluable in the years to come. The first Lavi prototype flew on the last day of 1986, a year behind schedule and massively over budget. The aircraft performed well in flight tests, but the cost projections continued to climb. What had started as a $15 million per aircraft program had ballooned to estimates of over $50 million per copy. The Israeli Air Force began questioning whether the Lavi was worth the investment. Major General Avihu Ben-Nun argued that Israel could buy 75 F-16s for the cost of developing and producing the Lavi. The F-16 was already available, already proven in combat, and considerably cheaper. The debate over the Lavi split Israeli society. Supporters saw the program as a matter of national pride and technological independence. Opponents saw it as a financial black hole that threatened to consume the entire defense budget. The United States government was increasingly concerned about the cost overruns and the precedent of using American military aid to develop a foreign fighter jet that might one day compete with American products in export markets. On August 30, 1987, the Israeli cabinet voted 12-11 to cancel the Lavi program. The margin was a single vote, and one minister abstained. 4,000 workers at Israel Aircraft Industries faced layoffs. The dream of an indigenous Israeli fighter jet died that day. But the knowledge gained from the Lavi program did not disappear. It was channeled instead into modifying American aircraft, particularly the F-16, to Israeli specifications. The cancellation of the Lavi forced Israel to accept a new reality. The nation would not build its own fighter jets. Instead, it would become the world's foremost modifier of American aircraft. The engineers and technicians who had worked on the Lavi turned their attention to the F-16 and later the F-15, applying the lessons they had learned to create variants that were more capable than anything the United States Air Force operated. Israel Aircraft Industries, the company that had designed and built the Lavi, began producing major components for the F-16. The Israelis manufactured wings, assembled substructures, and integrated Israeli systems into American airframes. The relationship evolved from customer and supplier to something closer to partnership. American and Israeli engineers worked side by side, each learning from the other, each contributing expertise that made the final product greater than what either nation could have achieved alone. The 1990s brought new challenges and new opportunities. Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990 threatened to draw Israel into a regional war. Saddam Hussein launched Scud missiles at Tel Aviv and Haifa, hoping to provoke an Israeli response that would split the American-led coalition. Israeli F-16s sat on high alert, loaded with bombs, waiting for the order to strike Iraqi targets. The order never came. The United States convinced Israel to stay out of the war, promising that American forces would hunt down the Scud launchers. Israel's pilots watched from the sidelines as American F-16s destroyed Iraqi air defenses and struck targets throughout the country. The Gulf War demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of the F-16. American pilots flew over 13,000 sorties, the most of any coalition aircraft. The F-16 proved itself as a versatile platform capable of striking ground targets, defending airspace, and suppressing enemy air defenses. But the war also revealed deficiencies. Navigation systems struggled in the featureless desert. Targeting pods were in short supply. The aircraft lacked the range to strike deep targets without extensive aerial refueling. Israeli engineers took note of these lessons and incorporated them into their own F-16 variants. They developed conformal fuel tanks that increased range without reducing weapons capacity. They integrated advanced targeting pods that allowed pilots to identify and engage targets with precision previously unimaginable. They created new electronic warfare systems that could defeat the latest Russian-made missiles. Each improvement made the Israeli F-16 more capable and more deadly. By the late 1990s, Israel needed a new generation of F-16s. The Nets and early Barak variants were aging. The threat environment had evolved. Iran was developing long-range ballistic missiles and pursuing nuclear weapons. Syria was acquiring advanced air defense systems from Russia. Israel needed an aircraft that could penetrate defended airspace, strike targets hundreds of miles away, and return safely to base. In September 1997, Israel issued a requirement for a new strike aircraft. The competition came down to two American designs, a variant of the F-15 Strike Eagle and a modified F-16. Both aircraft had their advocates within the Israeli Air Force. The F-15 offered greater range and payload capacity. The F-16 was more maneuverable and considerably cheaper. In July 1999, Israel announced that it had selected the F-16. The aircraft that emerged from this decision was unlike any F-16 before it. Designated F-16 RQII, with the I standing for Israel and given the Hebrew name Sufa, meaning storm, the new variant represented the culmination of 2 decades of Israeli modifications and American engineering expertise. Approximately 50% of the aircraft's avionics were replaced with Israeli-developed systems. The transformation was so extensive that some military analysts argued the Sufa was essentially a new aircraft wearing F-16 skin. Elbit Systems, one of Israel's premier defense electronics companies, produced the helmet-mounted sight that allowed Sufa pilots to aim weapons simply by looking at targets. They manufactured the head-up display that projected critical flight information directly into the pilot's line of sight. They developed the mission computer that coordinated all of the aircraft's systems into a unified whole. The level of integration was unprecedented in the history of the F-16 program. Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, another Israeli defense giant, provided weapons that no other F-16 could carry. The Python 5 missile, a 5th-generation infrared-guided air-to-air weapon, could engage targets at any angle, even those behind the launching aircraft. The missile's sophisticated seeker could distinguish between decoy flares and actual aircraft, making it nearly impossible to defeat with countermeasures. In tests, the Python 5 consistently outperformed American missiles like the Sidewinder and even the advanced M9X. For ground attack missions, the Sufa carried the SPICE family of precision-guided weapons. SPICE, an acronym for Smart, Precise, Impact, Cost-Effective, represented a revolution in bombing technology. The weapon could be programmed before flight with precise target coordinates and images of the target area. Once released, It would glide to the target using GPS guidance and finally use electro-optical seekers to identify and strike the exact aim point. Accuracy was measured in centimeters, not meters. A spice bomb could fly through a specific window of a specific building. The Sufa's two-seat configuration was not a concession, but a deliberate design choice. The weapon systems officer in the back seat managed the aircraft's sensors, electronic warfare systems, and precision weapons. This division of labor freed the pilot to concentrate on flying the aircraft and making tactical decisions. For long-range strike missions that might last hours and require multiple target engagements, the two-crew arrangement proved invaluable. If you have watched this far, consider sharing this video with friends who appreciate military history. Your support makes our work possible and helps preserve these important stories for future generations. The first Sufa fighters were delivered to the Israeli Air Force in 2004. They immediately joined 3 squadrons based at Ramon Air Base in the Negev Desert: the Bat Squadron, the 1 Squadron, and the Negev Squadron. A 4th squadron, the Knights of the Orange Tail, operated from Hatzarim Air Base. Together, these units formed the backbone of Israel's long-range strike capability. The Sufa's combat debut came during the Second Lebanon War in July 2006. Hezbollah had launched thousands of rockets into northern Israel from positions in southern Lebanon. Israeli ground forces struggled to locate and destroy the launch sites hidden among civilian populations. The Israeli Air Force turned to its precision strike capabilities, and the F-16'S Sufa proved its worth. Flying missions around the clock, Sufa crews struck command bunkers, weapons storage facilities, and rocket launchers with devastating accuracy. The war also demonstrated the effectiveness of Israeli electronic warfare systems. Syrian surface-to-air missiles posed a constant threat to Israeli aircraft operating over Lebanon. The Sufa's defensive suite detected missile launches, identified threat radars, and automatically deployed countermeasures. In one engagement, an F-16 shot down multiple Hezbollah unmanned aerial vehicles using Python 5 missiles, proving that the aircraft could defeat both manned and unmanned threats. The years that followed brought continued refinement of the F-16'S Sufa and its predecessor variants. Israeli engineers developed new software that improved the aircraft's radar performance and expanded its weapons envelope. They integrated new sensors that enhanced situational awareness in complex combat environments. They created modifications that extended the aircraft's service life far beyond original projections. An F-16 designed in the 1970s was being modified in the 21st century to defeat threats that its creators could never have imagined. The evolution of the Israeli F-16 illustrates a broader truth about modern military technology. The platform matters less than the systems it carries and the people who operate it. A fighter jet is not a static object but a living system that evolves with each upgrade, each modification, each lesson learned in combat. The F-16 that flies today bears little resemblance to the YF-16 prototype that made its first flight in 1974. Decades of continuous improvement have transformed a lightweight fighter into a precision strike platform capable of missions that would have been science fiction during the Cold War. The relationship between American and Israeli engineers has been central to this transformation. Americans provided the basic platform, a brilliantly designed aircraft that offered exceptional performance and remarkable growth potential. Israelis provided combat experience, operational requirements shaped by decades of warfare, and a willingness to push technology to its limits. Together, they created something greater than either could have achieved alone. In January 2025, the Israeli Ministry of Defense announced a new contract worth $80 million for Elbit Systems to develop and install advanced self-protection suites on the F-16 Schurter Sufa fleet. The upgrade includes cutting-edge electronic warfare systems, infrared missile warning and launch detection sensors, and advanced chaff and flare dispensers. The goal is to ensure that aircraft designed decades ago can continue to operate safely in modern combat environments where threats evolve constantly. The electronic warfare suite represents the culmination of Israeli expertise in this critical field. Israeli engineers have spent decades developing systems that can detect, identify, and defeat enemy threats. The new suite will provide early warning of missile launches from both ground and airborne platforms. It will automatically deploy countermeasures tailored to specific threat types. It will integrate with other aircraft systems to provide pilots with a comprehensive picture of the threat environment. In a world where a single surface-to-air missile can mean the difference between life and death, these systems are not luxuries, but necessities. The upgrades also reflect a strategic reality. Israel cannot afford to retire its F-16 fleet. The aircraft remain essential to Israeli defense strategy, providing capabilities that newer platforms like the F-35 cannot fully replicate. The F-16's relatively low cost per flight hour, its ability to carry heavy weapons loads, and its proven reliability make it irreplaceable for many mission sets. Rather than retire these aircraft, Israel has chosen to continuously upgrade them, keeping them relevant for decades to come. The story of the F-16 in Israeli service offers lessons that extend far beyond military aviation. It demonstrates the power of technological partnership between nations with complementary strengths. It shows how combat experience can drive innovation in ways that peacetime development cannot match. It illustrates the importance of institutional knowledge and continuous improvement, and it reveals how a nation's strategic culture shapes the weapons it develops and deploys. American engineers designed the F-16 to be an exceptional air-to-air fighter. Israeli engineers transformed it into a precision strike platform that has changed the course of Middle Eastern history. The reactor at Osirak would have produced nuclear weapons for Saddam Hussein's regime. The Syrian Air Force that challenged Israel in the Bekaa Valley would have posed a far greater threat, if not decimated, by F-16'S fighters. The terrorist infrastructure in Lebanon and Gaza has been repeatedly targeted by F-16 Sufa aircraft carrying precision weapons that minimize collateral damage while maximizing operational effectiveness. The F-16's success in Israeli service also influenced American doctrine and design. Lessons learned in Israeli operations found their way back to American squadrons. Tactics developed over the skies of Lebanon were adopted by NATO pilots training for potential conflict with the Soviet Union. Modifications pioneered by Israeli engineers were eventually incorporated into F-16s operated by the United States and its allies. The relationship was truly symbiotic, with knowledge flowing in both directions across the Atlantic. Today, the Israeli Air Force operates the second-largest fleet of F-16s in the world, behind only the United States Air Force. These aircraft have participated in operations that remain classified, striking targets in Syria, Sudan, and potentially Iran. They provide the backbone of Israeli air power, the tool that Israeli commanders reach for when they need precision strike capability anywhere in the Middle East. The F-16'S, Barak, and Sufa variants have served Israel for over 4 decades, a testament to the soundness of the original American design and the brilliance of the Israeli modifications. The future of the F-16 in Israeli service remains bright despite the arrival of the F-35 Adir. Israel has invested heavily in upgrading its F-16 fleet to Barak 2020 configuration, giving older aircraft avionics comparable to the F-16I Sufa. Plans are underway to potentially upgrade these aircraft to the F-16V Block 70 standard, which would give them new radars, new cockpit displays, and new weapons capabilities. The F-16 may fly in Israeli colors for decades to come, a bridge between the jets that won the air battles of the 20th century and the stealth fighters that will dominate the 21st. The transformation of the F-16 by Israeli engineers represents one of the most successful technology partnerships in military history. What began as a simple purchase of American fighters evolved into a deep collaboration that produced aircraft more capable than either nation could have developed alone. American design genius met Israeli operational necessity, and the result was a weapon system that has shaped the strategic balance of the Middle East for over 40 years. The pilots who flew the Osirak mission in 1981 could not have imagined the aircraft that their successors would fly 4 decades later. The F-16'S Sufa, with its Israeli avionics, Israeli weapons, and Israeli electronic warfare systems, represents a quantum leap in capability from the original nets. Yet the fundamental qualities that made the F-16 successful remain unchanged. It is still the most maneuverable fighter in its class. It still offers exceptional visibility from its bubble canopy. It still responds to pilot inputs with a precision that borders on telepathy. The soul of the aircraft, the essence of what makes an F-16 an F-16, has survived every modification and upgrade. This is the secret that American engineers gave to Israel and Israeli engineers perfected. A great aircraft is not defined by its specifications or its capabilities, but by its potential for growth. The F-16 was designed with margins for improvement, spaces in the airframe, and power reserves in the engine that could accommodate systems that did not yet exist. Israeli engineers exploited those margins relentlessly, filling every available space with sensors and weapons and defensive systems. The aircraft that emerged was better than anything its designers had envisioned. The story of the F-16 in Israeli service continues to unfold. New threats demand new capabilities. New technologies offer new possibilities. The partnership between American and Israeli engineers that began over 4 decades ago remains vital, driven by shared interests and mutual respect. The F-16 that flew the Osirak mission was a weapon. The F-16'S Sufa that patrols Israeli skies today is something more. It is the product of human ingenuity, national determination, and the refusal to accept limitations that others consider absolute. In the hangars at Ramon Air Base, technicians work through the night, preparing aircraft for tomorrow's missions. In offices at Elbit Systems and Rafael, engineers design systems that will not enter service for years. In the cockpits of F-16s flying combat patrols over hostile territory, pilots trust their lives to machines that represent the combined genius of 2 nations. The secret of the F-16 is that there is no secret. There is only the relentless pursuit of excellence, the endless drive to make tomorrow's aircraft better than today's, and the understanding that in aerial warfare, second best means defeat. The men who flew those 8 F-16s against the Osirak reactor risked everything on an unproven aircraft. Their courage and skill wrote the first chapter of a story that continues to this day. The engineers who modified the F-16 transformed an American fighter into an Israeli weapon. Their work honored the sacrifice of pilots who came before and protected those who would follow. This is the F-16's secret. This is how American engineers and Israeli visionaries together created one of the most lethal and versatile fighter jets in military history, and this is why more than 50 years after its first flight, the F-16 Fighting Falcon remains the standard against which all other fighters are measured. Thank you for watching. If this documentary provided insight into the remarkable story of the F-16 in Israeli service, please subscribe to the channel and share this video with others who appreciate military history. Every view and subscription helps us continue producing content that honors the men and women who have served in conflicts around the world.